For the second video of the Rotten Blood quest guide, I will be covering the boss Chagorz, but it's worth mentioning that the order of Chagorz or Bemia for second place is of the team's preference. There is teams that do Bemia second, and we had tried that as well, but personally, because we are more familiar with Darklight and have the charms, it's easier for us to clear the access for it with 2 10s, so we do Gloom Pillars in second place with the 110, which you should have gotten from doing Motion already. Besides, we find Chagorz to be harder than Bemias, so it works best to do it with less stains. For the access in Gloom Pillars, the preferred protections are Fire and Holy for mages, and Physical Holy Fire for the EK and RP. Again, for the record, with my team we prefer the method of clearing the access, other teams prefer to run through it, so briefly I will cover how that works. There is 5 pillars in the spawn that give 15 charges, but because that will not be enough to get access, the method people use instead is to click the first pillar and go back to the entrance to wait out for 10 minutes. After that time, you can click the same pillar again, and this time you will run across the spawn to hit them all, which will give enough charges to get inside the boss room. Something worth pointing out is that the pillars have a brief inactive state upon use, so if you choose to run the access, it must be done separately in order to use the pillars. Choosing to clear the way instead also will get you enough charges by the time you click on all 5 pillars and get to the boss room. This is safer in my opinion and ends up taking roughly the same amount of time, with the wait time included from the first pillar. Regardless of which method you choose, once at the boss room, remember to have the EK be the first to go in and the RP last. But for the boss fight, the damage taken goes like this, so it's recommended to gear up with energy and fire protection. And let me start with the general mechanics. Every step you guys take will leave behind a blood field. These last for 3 seconds, and deals 3% of the player's max HP if stepping on them or every second you stay on top of one. This is not as dangerous to the mages, but it can be for the EK and RP, especially taking into consideration the secondary mechanic to this, which is each second everyone gets 2 charges. If you reach 20, you start taking 15% of your max HP per second. So in order to avoid reaching that amount of charges, you must move around, since each step you take removes 1 charge. Again, mages are able to move back and forth in the same 2 squares if necessary, or move in wider laps. Additionally, it's worth pointing out that the boss heals every time he steps on the blood fields that the RP is leaving behind while kiting, so it's good to pay attention to the pathing. The secondary general mechanic is the summoning of pillars of dark energy from Chagorz. These are done randomly and with random patterns. It can be unlucky and trap the RP with the boss, and that's very dangerous, especially based on the charges the RP has. But besides that, if a player is next to one of these pillars, it triggers a chain attack that can bounce quite far, so mages often get hit by this and it's quite dangerous if the chains are stacking. For that reason, it's important to avoid standing in melee range to any of them, but it's unavoidable to get hit sometimes due to the randomness of the response, and it's why the mages split out to the sides of the room to minimize damage taken, with main ED being alone in one side and the other 2 in the opposite. Besides the chain attack that has a base damage, it also applies a curse of fire damage over time, with 1200 damage per tick each second. You will see it as another charge counter with a red icon. This one is quite important, because Chagorz has a beam that if you get hit by it, it will do all the damage you are cursed with. So if you get hit at 10 charges, it will do 12k fire damage in one go. If you have 5, then 6k and so on. So a mage with charges needs to always be diagonal to the boss and avoid getting beamed, and Paladin needs to avoid it as much as possible. When the pillars are up and you can't get melee by them as their RP, it's okay to get hit by the beam to tank the damage if you can afford it. Just something worth knowing for later. Next up is the EK's job. First up is to take the aggro of the Bloodgels and kite them around in the southern part of the room. Be aware that the first thing gives the ability to Bloodgels of swapping places with players. If you stay on the south, away from the shooters, then it's less likely for them to swap a mage, but it will happen sometimes, and EK can also get swapped, throwing you off. They do give a warning saying sharp before this happens, and I personally recommend staying still and waiting for it. For the rare case you get swapped near the teleport and walk out by mistake. Additionally, and more importantly, upon entering the room, a timer begins where every 90 seconds an orange teleport appears in the middle. You will have 15 seconds to lure a Bloodgel into it. If you fail at bringing the Bloodgel at the 15 seconds mark, every player takes 40% of their max SP as agony damage. However, doing it on time gives a bunch of benefits, most notably the boss becoming weaker for 15 seconds and removing the Bloodgels from the room, which means it's the best time to swap the EK with the RP to tank the boss. Because another thing that happens with the mechanic is that Chagorz will do 2 attacks at the 6 and 12 seconds. and this hits differently based on the target of Chagorz, with EKs taking the least amount of damage, where everyone else will be taking 20 and 40% of max XP respectively. So, in order to keep track of this, it's necessary to have a timer going. It could be on your phone or a second monitor. What I personally use is this website. I go with the countdown option, setting a timer for 20:03. This is so that I can press start and then count down for the team to 3 seconds and pull the lever at 20. Then I just need to keep a look at the 90 seconds intervals, drop the blowjobs and swap the boss. Upon dropping the blowjobs, the 12-second timer starts for the special attacks. But for this boss, we go with the indication the boss gives, which is a rare message after launching the second attack. After that, you can swap the boss safely, and I highly recommend to build the habit of walking north of the wall before this, and then rushing down in a straight line. This will give more room for the interception compared to swapping near the middle, and risking having the boss go on a mage or a blowjob respawn and go on the paladin. Next up is the paladin's job, which more or less has been covered in the general mechanics. You want to kite the boss in a controlled speed. Don't get too far from it because it retargets based on proximity. You want to avoid the boss walking over your own blood trial because this heals the boss for 375 HP per second, which is not a big deal for this boss in particular, but is recommended to build up the good habit of kiting it properly, since this is a massive mechanic in the final boss Chagorz. Ideally, you want to kite him in a closed circle by the north of the room, but it's recommended to avoid walking directly next to the wall, like my paladin is doing on the clip. This was one of our first attempts, and is something that he has stopped doing since getting trapped by pillars twice in one fight. So just kite him, and when he summons the pillars, you can take it away from them and stand diagonal to the sides. Next up, you want to avoid reaching 20 charges. Paladins often get high charges because of holding it still, which is fine to do, especially if done to avoid walking next to the pillars. It's good to avoid that when possible, and if you absolutely need to walk near them, that's when you must be very careful with not getting hit by the beam. Even with good fire protection, you will lose over half of your HP easily. Additionally, this boss lowers your distance quite often, and for that reason, you need to be refreshing your skills with bullseye potions when this happens. Experienced paladins can get away with Utiro tempos, but this boss is quite dangerous on damage, so it's preferred to not spam it and be strategic with it instead. And when doing the swap of the boss, pay attention to the charges you have, because your chances of getting hit with the beam are high when blocking the boss, so you might even consider putting an energy ring for that swap if you are high on charges. Additionally, something to be careful with is getting a blowjob on you. This only happens in rare scenarios, but when it does, if the EK can't come for it for whatever reason, the next play will be for the sorcerer to get near the boss, unmanageable and take the aggro for a bit. No need to block his path, since it is very likely to retarget on its own, and then the RP can lure the blowjob down south to the EK. This is dangerous, but is more consistent than trying to grab aggro of blowjobs as a mage. Again, this is not common, but the fight gets very messy when it happens, and it's better if you are prepared beforehand and know what to do. With that said, that's all I got for this boss. If you found it helpful, consider subscribing. I'm working on finishing the rest of the quest guide. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next one.